an extremely important event during my life. The or as I think more about it, the things that I'd like to point out about World War II that I think were will remain with us, hopefully, and change or have an impact on the world, or not so much World War II itself, but how World War II ended in two ways. Uh, but let me just take them one at a time. Two things that I think about the World War II that we ought to watch as being very important in the development in the world. Uh, First is the development of the atomic bomb, atomic weapons. Uh, the Both sides in World War II seemed to have some idea that there was a great atomic power and useful for weapons, and were interested in becoming the first ones to develop such a weapon, and figured that it would change the whole shape of the war. And of course, as the events occurred, it turned out to be true, but it didn't impact a great deal of the war, because it was almost the war was virtually over before the atomic weapon actually was realized. Uh, but the development of the weapon itself is what I think played such an important part, because it was considered so important that just great amounts of resources were poured into its development, and an emphasis on the scientific community that was essentially unprecedented in government thinking in the past. It was such an important concept that the government began to see the development of science and scientific thought as being extremely important to the role that that government would continue to play, or that society would continue to play in the world. So we see that the government was pouring great effort and resources into developing a scientific project with the thought that this might end the war. And of course, although I don't think it changed the end of the war, or changed the outcome of the war, it certainly changed the way that the war ended, and it continued on after the war was over into the way the whole world lived or developed for a good many years after. And still today, we emphasize science more than it had ever been previously emphasized in any of the societies. Well, as a matter of fact, I believe I've seen a reference to more than in more than one place. I recall as a student in college, the statement was made, and this would have been back in the 1960s, that there were more scientists alive in the world, or more than half the scientists that had ever lived in the world were still alive at that time. So it implied that the emphasis on science, on scientific thought and impacting the world was much greater than it had ever been in any previous societies. The other thing that I thought was extremely important in the end of World War II was the attitude of particularly the United States, but the Allies, in how they handled the post-war era. I mean, traditionally it had always been the kind of a to the victor belong the spoils in wars, with that whoever won the war then collected what they considered their debt from the losers, and they looted the countryside and carried loot home with them. After World War II, the United States particularly had taken the position that we're just going to have another one if we do that again. After World War I, they had decimated the economies, the already decimated economies of the countries that lost, and those countries simply weren't able to recover. So in the form of the Marshall Plan, among others, the attitude at the end of World War II seemed to be, well, let's help these people shore themselves up so they don't have to go through this again, and maybe we won't have to fight a World War III because these economies need to steal the resources from others to get by, and it seemed to have a great effect on the way the post-war Europe, particularly and Japan, were able to recover from having lost the war and from all the war expenses and everything, and build their economies back up to be very vibrant and well, like I say, it remains to be seen how important that really is, but it seems to me to have been an important attitude change. Even the small conflicts that we've had since World War II seem to show that philosophy, along with or at least some of it, that once the war's over, let's get on with life and make sure everybody can get back on their feet.
World War II was a global armed conflict that was underway by 1939 and ended 1945. In August 1939, Hitler and Stalin signed the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, which incited a frenzy of worry in London and Paris. The pact with Stalin meant that Hitler would not face a war of two fronts once he invaded Poland, and would have Soviet assistance in conquering and dividing the nation itself.
I wanted to think of, so I'm lumping those two developments of World War One or World War II into one of the things that I'm allowed to choose. Let's look at the second one. I think it's in the same vein a little bit, because it's been a real exponential growth of technology, if you will, specifically in the area of microelectronics. The when I was a boy, a young person growing up, developing, we didn't have anywhere near the technological things at our fingertips that we have now. And again, it's an area that just exploded. We went from vacuum tubes, which gave us electronics, which gave us televisions, which gave us radios, and we were able to grow up with things that we didn't have when we were young. But particularly when it got into the micro realm, the integrated circuit electronics and all, just suddenly the things that you could have just leaped right out of the imagination into reality, and you can see the people that aren't used to not having them, and how they handle those in text when they've got other things going on. It just has introduced a whole new age to the world. I don't think there will be any going back from that. That's going to be and it may simply be a small stepping stone, that the developments yet to come are going to boggle the mind so much to where this one will be just one of many. But right now it seems to me to be a very significant development in the way the world is going. Well, maybe enough said there.
Essentially, a field in electronics that uses very small of microcomponents for manufacturing electronics products. Microelectronic technology is a key enabler in changing the face of technology.
Point out is really very, very similar in the same vein. It's the development in technology but in the communications and the navigation, if you will, or leading essentially into globalization. I think the globalization of the world that's been allowed or made possible by the ease and the proliferation of ways to communicate and ability to extend the range of communications and travel has just made it so that the world has shrunk. Where people used to grow up, when I was a boy growing up, it wasn't unusual to have people that had never traveled more than 100 miles from their home and had essentially no communications with people that they didn't see on a somewhat regular basis. And now it's to the point where you can communicate without even a thought with anybody in the world, any place in the world. You can listen to the same music going on anywhere in the world. You can listen to the same thoughts, the same philosophies, the same ideas, and there just isn't the isolation, or the tendency is towards where there's not going to be the isolation where that we've seen, and I think the globalization is essentially going to be complete. Where we go from there, not real clear, but again, I think this is one of those things that we won't be going back from. It's essentially an irreversible step of getting into kind of a oneness.
Are you done?
You can have it back now or ask me more questions.
I can't even see my mouse.
You what?
But I couldn't see my... People weren't as mixed and not as isolated, so good things came out of the development of microelectronics.